Yo guys, welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to go ahead and dive into the Unhallowed Essence Multishot Demon Hunter for Season 28. This set just got a massive buff in Season 28, and so I'm thinking that this build should remain relevant for future seasons to come, assuming that they don't change anything more about the set. First, let's go ahead and dive into some of the skills and the options that you have when you're making this build. Alright, for the primary skill, I recommend taking Evasive Fire with the Cauldron so that we can gain additional hatred. We're effectively spamming Multishot just about the entire time with this build. We're using Evasive Fire to keep our Wraps of Clarity up and to keep the Focus and Restraint combo going. Getting as much hatred as we can is incredibly important for this build so that we can spam Multishot as much as possible. Now, of course, the next skill we're going to be using is the Multishot. I happen to be using the Cauldron because my gear has cold damage on it. Generally speaking, you're going to want to go with the Arsenal rune, which fires rockets. But one note that I will make is you don't necessarily want to force yourself into playing fire. For example, if you get plus physical damage on, say, your Wraps of Clarity and on your Squirt's necklace, go ahead and use the physical rune. It's really good too. The Cauldron, also viable. Just know that eventually you do want to work your way towards getting fire gear to play the Arsenal rune because it is the optimal pick. Next up, we're going to be using Shadow Power with Shadow Glide. This is going to give us additional movement speed and life per hit. We'll also be using Smokescreen with this placement. This is mostly just to avoid damage and to keep ourselves moving really quickly. This next one is incredibly important to the build. We're going to be taking Preparation with Invigoration. Although we're not necessarily going to be activating this very much because we are stacking a ton of resource cost reduction and we're not generally going down on Discipline very much. Although if it does happen to occur, it's nice to have this to boost your Discipline, but the primary reason that we're using this is the passive to increase our maximum Discipline by 20. When we look at the 6-piece set bonus that we have here, your Generators, Multishot, and Vengeance deal 1700% increased damage for every point of Discipline that you have. And for that reason, this is a huge increase in your damage and absolutely a mandatory skill that you have to take. Lastly, we'll be using Vengeance with Darkheart, pretty standard for just about every single Demon Hunter build. More damage reduction, really solid skill all around. Moving into the passives, we'll start with Tactical Advantage to gain additional movement speed. Now for this next one. This one is a little bit dependent on which variation of the build you're playing. If you're going with Fire, and you have the Arsenal rune on your Multishot, I would not actually recommend Awareness here. You're going to need a way to activate your Bane of the Trapped for additional damage, and so, in that case, I would recommend going with Thrill of the Hunt. Now, if you're playing Cold, you can do a lot of different things with this slot. Awareness is fine. Alternatively, you can also take Coal of the Weak. With the Cold rune, your Multishot is actually chilling enemies, and so you'll just get this flat damage bonus. You could also opt to go with Hot Pursuit if you just want to move through rifts more quickly. There's also decent options like Steady Aim or Archery just to gain a bit of additional damage. The next one we're going to go with is going to be Blood Vengeance. This is really good just to keep our hatred up so that we can spam more Multishots, and this also just regenerates that little bit of Discipline that we're using because with each point that we use, we are actually losing quite a bit of damage. And so it's nice to pick up these health globes and get that back. And lastly, with this slot, I like to play Ambush in just about any Demon Hunter build. It is a ton of damage up front, which can really help us take enemies out very quickly. Moving on to the gear, we're going to go ahead and use 5 pieces of Unhallowed Essence, 2 pieces of Captain Crimson, and we are going to have a Ring of Royal Grandeur in the cube so that we can benefit from the 3 and 6-piece set bonuses. With the helm, these are the stats that you're going to want to take. Dexterity, crit chance, multi-shot damage, and a socket with ideally a topaz in it. Although cooldown reduction is very nice, having that resource cost reduction is better because it's going to allow us to keep our Discipline a little bit higher and allow us to shoot off more multi-shots without running out of hatred. Moving on to the shoulders, Dexterity is good, Vitality or All Resistance. Either one is going to work absolutely fine. Then you're going to want your cooldown and resource cost reduction. If you choose to push with this build, which isn't necessarily something that I recommend, I think that Marauders and Natalias are both quite a bit better for pushing, but should you opt to do it, as opposed to the Vitality roll here, you could go with area damage. For the chest, this is not quite optimal. Ideally, you'd want Dexterity, Vitality, and Resist All Elements. I've only got 15% life on this. The chest is harder to roll than you may think. It's harder for this set than just about any other Demon Hunter set. And the reason for that is we absolutely need this secondary roll for plus 12 maximum Discipline. Using a Primal chest with perfect rolls, other than the plus 12 maximum Discipline, is actually a huge damage loss for this build. So make sure that you're going with even a non-ancient just make sure that you've got plus 12 discipline on that secondary. For the amulet, we're going to take Squirt's Necklace. You're going to want to use the element that aligns with the rune that you're using on your multi-shot. Fire is ideal, but you're going to want to take that, crit, and a socket with Zaystone of Vengeance. Wraps of Clarity. Once again, the element of your choice, and then Dexterity, Vitality, Crit Chance. Alrighty, and for the gloves, we'll be taking Unhallowed Essence again. Dexterity is good. There is a better roll than Vitality here. Ideally, you'd want to get attack speed, but of course, Crit Chance and Crit Damage are correct. Moving along to the belt and legs, we've got Captain Crimson's here. Dexterity, Vitality, Resist All Elements, and Percent Life is absolutely fine. And for the legs, Dexterity, Vitality, Resist All Elements, you'll want those 2 sockets with diamonds in them. Now for the rings, there are some options. A lot of people like to go with Stone of Jordan here because it is the only ring in the game that you can actually roll plus discipline on the secondary. Now for the other ring slot, should you choose to go with a Stone of Jordan, you could take a Convention of Elements. However, in my testing, I've found that generally focus and restraint are just better. Now, especially since this build is more focused on speed farming as opposed to pushing, I don't necessarily like Convention of Elements because you're only getting that buff for 4 seconds every 16. As opposed to Focus and Restraint, you've got a big damage increase that's up 100% of the time so long as you're shooting off your generator and your spender. When it comes to the rolls, for both Focus and Restraint, you're going to want average damage, crit chance, crit damage, and a socket. If you cannot get that average damage, just about anything else is fine. Dexterity works, cooldown reduction works, attack speed works, just about anything that adds some amount of damage. And for the gems, I would recommend taking Bane of the Trapped, and I like taking Molten Wildebeest Gizzard. If you just want to go for more power all around, you can take Bane of the Powerful. However, I really like using Molten Wildebeests in builds like this that are a bit susceptible to damage and are also using a Squirt's Necklace. The Molten Wildebeest is going to keep us alive and protect the buff on our Squirt's Necklace. But if you're an absolute god gamer, go ahead and go with that Bane of the Powerful. You'll be just fine as long as you're not getting hit and losing the Squirt's buff. For the feet, once again, Unhallowed Essence, Dexterity, Vitality, Resist All Elements, Multi-Shot damage. Now for the weapon, we'll be using Yang's Recurve. This is absolutely essential for the build. Multi-Shot attacks faster, deals more damage. Make sure that that secondary roll is as high as possible. The Yang's is actually quite difficult to roll perfectly for this build because we need the secondary stat of plus 12 maximum discipline. We also need a good secondary roll on the damage multiplier for Multishot. And on top of that, we have to hope that our primary rolls are decent as well. So this is not quite perfect. The 10% damage is very good. Dexterity is fine. Of course, it will always come with the resource cost reduction. The Vitality, on the other hand, would probably be better as attack speed, cooldown reduction, or maybe even more resource cost reduction, which you can stack on top of that 50%. Now for the offhand, we'll be using Dead Man's Legacy, and this one is also very difficult to roll well. Similar to the Yang's, we need that secondary roll to get maximum discipline. Mine is only 10, which is actually a pretty big damage loss. For each point of discipline that I am missing, I am losing out on 1700% increased damage on that 6-piece set bonus. Once again, you want that secondary roll to be really high for the multi-shot damage. Dexterity is good, Vitality is okay, but ideally, you would probably rather have resource cost reduction. Attack speed is good, crit chance is good, and multi-shot damage is essential. When it comes to your crafted primal, I would recommend using it either on the Dead Man's Legacy, the Yang's, or the Squirt's Necklace. These are going to be the 3 hardest pieces to roll in the build. Okay, moving along to the cube. In your first slot, I recommend taking Echoing Fury. As an alternative to this, you can opt to go with Dawn for cooldown reduction on your Vengeance. Personally, I like using the Echoing Fury. You can build up those stacks really quickly, goes up to 5 stacks. You get a bunch of attack speed and movement speed out of it, keeps you moving through these rifts really quickly. Okay, and for the armor slot, this comes out of Act 3 bounty bags. You're going to want to take Pride's Fall. Resource costs are reduced by 30% after not taking damage for 5 seconds. This is another reason I like to use the Molten Wildebeest Gizzard in this build, as opposed to Bane of the Powerful. When we have this absorption shield and we're getting hit, we're not losing the buff from our Pride's Fall. Should you go with Bane of the Powerful and you get hit, you're going to lose this buff. On top of that, you're going to lose the buff from your Squirt's Necklace. And lastly, as we had mentioned earlier, you have to go with Ring of Royal Grandeur in this build to benefit from the 6-piece set bonus on our Unhallowed Essence and the 3-piece on Captain Crimson's. Now when it comes to the follower, I would actually recommend taking the Enchantress over the Scoundrel. I just don't happen to have my Enchantress geared out yet, but it is nice to get the elemental damage from her as well as the cooldown reduction. Just to quickly cover the essential items that you're going to need on your follower, regardless of which one you take: the Flavor of Time, the Nemesis Bracers, the Oculus Ring, and the Gloves of Worship. Now when it comes to the follower token, if you've got a very geared out follower, which is something you should be trying to accomplish, this is really good for speedruns because you can allow them to gain access to all skills. But while you're building up your follower, if they're not geared enough yet, just go ahead and take the token that ensures that they cannot die. Now to just quickly cover some of the gameplay tips and tricks, you're going to want to ensure that you've got Shadow Power up as much as possible. Hit it just about every 5 seconds. When it comes to Smoke Screen, this is just how you're going to get from point A to point B much faster. It also keeps you safe and allows you to avoid projectiles and incoming damage in general. Make sure that you're firing off your generator at least every 5 seconds to keep up the Wraps of Clarity, and also the Focus and Restraint combo. Now when it comes to Multi-Shot, this is what you're going to be spamming most of the time. I do recommend getting used to Force Move. This allows you to shoot at the highest speed possible while also continuing to move your character forward. It's a lot more difficult to click back and forth. It gets a little bit exhausting, and so just by using Force Move, you're still maintaining the fastest shot rate as possible while keeping your character progressing forward. Well guys, that's just about all that I have for this build. I'm going to go ahead and put up a little bit of gameplay footage of a Speed GR120 that I ran right before I started filming. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah.